Hey,
There we
Jason.
go. What's up, Chris? How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, good, good. Awesome to have you on. I was taking a look at your LinkedIn profile and your history. I just thought I juggled a lot of roles. Um,
Fair
so
enough.
let's start there. What all are you involved in right now? Because it looks like a lot.
Yeah. Sure. Basically, my backstory is this. Yeah, I spent the past 10 years doing growth marketing, past seven running growth marketing agency, and past 3 to 4 years really advising a lot of the venture capital firms, especially in like the LA based area where I'm located, and working with their portfolio companies on go to market and growth. So all in all, I say, together probably worked with like 200, 250 plus like venture backed B2B companies on growth. And that's kind of how I've slowly kind of came into acceptance that I'm now somewhat of an expert in the field. Um, it's one of those weird things. Like you kind of I've been like my nose to the grindstone for a long time, kind of thing. And then about less than a year ago, I launched a company and sunsetted the agency. So that company is now called Leader Pro. Again, it was something that I presented to a couple of the VCs that I have good relationships with here in the LA area. There was two ideas that we were battling. Uh, on the agency side that was very successful for us, but there was a lot of constraint in terms of how we could scale those efforts up, and that was usually due to the fact that it required a huge amount of like human capital. So things that we were doing that were super like I would say repetitive or kind of like this broken, fragmented manual process. We basically took one of those and built out a B2B software marketplace called Leader Pro, where very similar to like a G2 or Capterra, where you can get matched in front of our audience. But the difference there is that instead of like a PPC or pay per lead model, we do a pay per meeting. So we actually facilitate the meeting, host it, and provide that feedback loop immediately afterwards. And 73% of our completed meetings turn into a sales opportunity for our customers. And in less than a year, we're working with customers like Monday and Lyft and Mixmax, Reply.io. So some pretty good logos, Hire.com, etc. And then on the buyer side, we have enterprise executives from companies like Red Bull, Masterclass, Tesla, Amazon, um, Paychex, DocuSign, amongst many others.
Oh, holy shit. That's a hell of a CV. I love the modesty of I guess I'm an expert. I've worked with 250 plus companies with some of those logos. Like
Yeah, I mean, I come from a different, like even further, back in my background, right? It's like I started my career in finance and then did a 180, ended up in entertainment, doing like TV and film production for a number of years. And like my first OG hack, I would say, was like I wrote, produced, directed a movie. It was a horror movie, like a found footage movie during that time when that stuff was hot, like the paranormal activity days. And I ended up selling that film to Lionsgate for a cash advance. And so um, that was something I shot in 5 days and then was able to package it in a way that got, studio attention. And then, yeah, that was the thing that I wanted to do as a kid. And then just, I had kind of like two choices at that point in time. Did I want to try to like carve out a living in this entertainment field, being a filmmaker of some sorts, or, try to figure out something else? And fortunately, I had a couple of friends of mine that I've known for now probably like 30 years, that started this online, you know, tux rental business as the first startup. And I had no idea what the hell it was, but that was probably almost 10 years ago. And that's how I started my entrepreneurial journey. And it's not really fast forward, but if you look 10 years later, this is kind of where I'm at now, right? So,
I am endlessly fascinated by origin stories of entrepreneurs.
yeah,
It's you get
absolutely.
some very interesting weird paths there, but as a nowhere near the success or background that you have. But I grew up with serial entrepreneurs. I've been a entrepreneur for most of my life and career, including having run a couple of growth marketing agencies. So I absolutely get the human capital side of things and restraint on that constraints on that piece. But I've got a theory that those of us that are truly entrepreneurs can't help ourselves. And I think at heart, like there's something, mental health wrong with almost all of us. It's
Yeah.
like, why in the world would you put yourself through this if there's not some compelling need that you have?
Yeah.
But well, cool.
And
So yeah, I mean, go ahead.
no, a lot of us, I mean, I have ADHD. Was diagnosed with that in my adult life. Made a lot of sense based on things that I realized in retrospect. But a lot of, I think, like founders that I've spoken to, similar thing. I mean, I think there's varying like personality traits that tend to carry over, and the ability to do a lot of things and wear a lot of different hats. I mean, in the general world, general population, probably isn't the best thing, but as like a founder or an entrepreneur, it's like a necessity. So it's just very interesting to kind of see like those things bubble up. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen the same thing in my experience and career. And yeah, I say it. I used to get invited in a lot of times to talk to like aspiring entrepreneurs, and I'd spend like the first half three quarters of it like, this is why this is the dumbest thing that you've ever thought about doing. You should never absolutely do something like this. And then it was like, okay, if you're still with me, then all right, we can go dig into like, how would you actually go make this happen? Probably why I'm not invited to do that as much as I used to be, but yeah, something to take to heart because everybody has this idea of like entrepreneurship, like this is an amazing thing, like
right.
get to be your own boss and all of that stuff, and it's like it's really damn hard.
Yeah,
So
for
yeah, hats
sure.
off to you and all of that success. I mean, that's pretty amazing on that side.
I
Um,
appreciate it.
so yeah, I mean, so topic today is SQLs, which is always front and center for companies and leadership, but especially so over what's happened over the last 6, 9, 12 months. Pretty much universally, everybody I talk to is like I'm really struggling on
Hmm.
like the outbound side of things or trying to convert, areas where it's like, hey, we used to have a pretty clear path and funnel. Now we've got people falling out of it or not, progressing through and stuff like that. It seems to be a pretty universal problem that everybody's butting their heads up against. And, at the same time, everybody's having to do this with fewer resources and
Hmm.
smaller teams and, more of an emphasis on profitability and actually, having a viable business. So, let's kind of start there. What have you seen kind of progress out of the last year or so on that side of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think like, there's a few things I think about. So, um, yeah, I think philosophically and just more on a higher level, I think like when you do like an outbound strategy, a lot of companies don't necessarily realize. I mean, this is maybe like an earlier stage problem, but that using multiple channels as part of like a single like intensive sales sequence is super super important. Um, like if you think about the growth of the Zoom infos of the world, the Apollos of the world, yeah, it's great that you're able to get contact data, but you're also like competing with like probably 10 other categories, and all the companies that exist in those categories are buying those same lists and buying the same contacts and then reaching out through the same channels. And if you talk to any like B2B, sales team or like founder, most of the times those channels are going to be like email, LinkedIn, right? And so what we found, past, I would say even before all this kind of uh, economic environment kind of situation that's transpired, is that we knew that we had to hit through different channels, right? So just kind of, and it's in the playbook too, kind of like how I think about things. But I think you got to mirror somewhat of that consumer journey in the B2B space. Like if I was to take a no name brand startup, of athletic shoes or like running shoes, for example, and I just hit up a consumer through like one social media platform and then just through emails, like the chances of them converting is very very slim to none kind of deal. But if I'm like putting it up on a billboard, text message and offer, having it on a streaming ad on Hulu across your favorite show, do some retargeting, hit you up on a social feed, and then I hit you on an email with another discount code, then at that point you're probably a little bit more inclined to buy. And I think the same thing with the B2B space, and it's just something that a lot of companies don't necessarily do. I think like your biggest asset is building that database. Like so a lot of times like, whatever ICP persona mix looks like, try to understand what is your TAM from a volume perspective. So the number of accounts that actually make sense for you um, as your customers. Even better yet, doing like a TAM SAM SOM analysis. So understanding like where does your product exist today, who can actually service today best, and then knowing that your product's going to evolve and your market size is going to evolve, right, to get to more of that true TAM. Um, and so like, things like that, for example, if you have like 10,000 accounts in the United States, that's going to be good customers for you. Get that database of like all those contacts, and then what I would do is leverage platforms like LinkedIn or paid social, um, as a billboard, right? So generating that brand awareness, generating that brand equity. Um, and so by the time that you do hit them through, again, like a multi-channel, like outbound sequence, there's going to be some level of familiarity. So I like to leverage paid channels in a way to like drive like thought leadership, again, building up that brand awareness so that once you do hit them up, that they are aware of you, they know of you, and then at that point in time, there's some trust for them to give them your attention, give yeah, give you their attention. Sorry about that, but yeah, I think that's kind of like the biggest thing, and one of the theses that I think about with Leader Pro is just like, you know, attention is now commodity. I know Gary Vaynerchuk talks about
Mhm.
this all the time, which is attention is like your biggest asset, um, your most valuable asset, and companies want that attention. And traditionally, what we've done is we just bombard through these channels, super noisy channels, and through paid advertising, try to trick the end user almost into like taking this meeting, right? Um, when how Leader Pro is working and kind of just what we were doing as an agency was kind of like, why don't we just pay you for your time and then make sure that in between that time period of when we have you scheduled to when we actually do the meeting, can we qualify that so that making sure that on paper that this is a good match to be had. And so by the time we do enter that meeting, that the expectations are pretty much aligned. I know that a lot of companies have tried kind of like this incentive approach before and they failed at it. And but I think that where companies need to really understand is like you got to break these things up into baby steps. I think
Mhm.
about it like this, which is like any outreach that we do from an outbound perspective. It's like, how do we get to just responses, right? Not even a positive response, but what can we say? What are we doing there to elicit a response? From a response to then a positive response is the next step, and a positive response to getting them booked into a calendar is the next action item, and then from them being booked to then making sure that they're qualified prior to the meeting, that's the next step, and then making sure that they show up to me, that's the final step, right? In terms of when we're talking about sales qualified leads and getting to the end game of what that is. Obviously, I think from completed demo or completed meeting to them becoming a customer is its own set of, you know I think, philosophy and kind of how you drive urgency, and how you want to do that. As a founder now, I've been having to face that. So getting a little bit more deeper into this in terms of the sales process. And but we found that really works is like create a discounting methodology and have expiration dates associated to every single one of those discounts. And then we actually bucket the way that we discount based on what the typical prospect is thinking about post meeting, right? So like, are they super excited, ready to go, and they're ready to jump in, or are they like hesitant around cost, or are they hesitant around quality? And based on those different scenarios, we will use a different discounting methodology or highlight different things, and again, attaching expiration date to each. And we found that to be extremely effective, ultimately to take them to close. So I'll stop there. It's a lot of information. Yeah,
No, spoken like a true growth person. Breaking things up into stages, optimization points, all of that stuff. I love it. That's the stuff that gets me really excited, and trying to get it to, honestly, getting us at Rev Genius to a place where we can get sophisticated with some things like that.
sure.
But 100% on understanding not just a multi-channel strategy, but also how do you move people along a funnel? How do you use value add content to, get, awareness built, all of that stuff. I mean, it's been 2, 3+ years that I've seen out since I've seen Outbound without all of those things work and be effective.
Yeah.
And the idea that you can go put people straight out of college with maybe their first job, certainly their first sales job, and say, hey, here's your list of
Yeah.
companies and contacts. Like, just go fire away at those and set meetings. It's been a long time since I've seen that work, and predated by a long time, sort of chickens coming home to roost for everybody else. It's like, this is just not working. It's not cost effective. But
Yeah.
when you pull those together, it's like, holy crap, that works.
Yeah.
But part of what I've seen within that is you've got to get leadership comfortable with not having straight line attribution of this rep did this touch, got this reply, turned into this opportunity, and all of that stuff. It's like, this all works in conjunction with each other. So you can't really say, like, hey, was this content focused email marketing? Was this paid campaigns? Was this, going out and getting, engagement within a community, or getting somebody that's a thought leader? Is it the outbound effort? Like, what is that? Well, it's all the above. But you got to get comfortable with sort of that messiness that those of us on the growth or demand gen marketing side of things have to live with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I know I maybe like sidestepped the original question there previously, but I mean, in terms of just where the economic environment is today, I mean, we run like we run surveys and do a lot of like kind of like market research. I think it's super important to obviously know your customer base and just know your audience. But yeah, I mean, companies are being asked to do a lot with very little, right? And that's happening across the board. I mean, if you're experiencing that internally from your own side of things, right? You got to imagine then if you're in the in the sales role or marketing role, like other companies that you're trying to then solicit is also probably going through something similar, right? So what we've been seeing is I think like we've been still able to generate like a large volume of demos or sales qualified leads, but I think like the urgency to close is not quite it's not as like how robust as it used to be, right? It's like longer sales cycles now. You know the value of those deals are coming down a little bit, but it also just depends on which place or you're playing at, right? I think like for Leader Pro and kind of like what we've been doing on that side, it's like we actually have been growing significantly during this downturn, and as an agency we typically had seen that too. Again, like during the pandemic, and when I think a lot of companies are tightening their budgets, like at the end of the day are we're valuable because I feel like we are like a performance based outcome, right? So it's a
Mhm.
measurable ROI, and you know how much something's going to cost in the very beginning. And there's no question about like, what the outcome is going to be when you're taking on like a hire, in the SDR BDR role, and you're just kind of like, yeah, have at it. I mean, you're it's just kind of like it boggles my mind how many companies do that, and then complain about it afterwards, right? It's just, yeah, I mean, for me, like again, coming from a growth background and now having to scale up sales reps for us to grow, um, that's something where I felt like, if coming from a growth background, I need to provide as many tools and resources for them to be able to be successful, because I know from my sales mindset is like, if I am not generating momentum within the first few weeks, I'm very disinterested. And I think it's like the same thing for any sales hire, let alone like a newbie sales hire that's coming in, right? You need to give them everything. And so we've created these playbooks leveraging 6 different types of initiatives with different call to actions coming from actually different entities. So still leveraging the growth agency for Leader Pro, but also having stuff coming from Leader Pro, etc. But like not just ROI, but we'll do like cash incentive for a meeting. We'll do like a market research survey where they can participate and opt. Essentially, it's like a qualification form. So we try all these
Mhm.
different types of tactics. And if you're running like, let's just say a cohort of 100, leads through that, instead of like, and you've probably seen this a lot, where it's like an ROI campaign where somebody is doing like 8 to 12 touches, annoying the crap out of you, and just saying, "Hey, I'm just funneling this up to the top of your inbox, funneling this up." You know what I mean? And sometimes they get passive aggressive with it. Like, I don't know how that's going to actually convert anybody. But what we found that works really well is like 2 to 3 touches across ROI initiative, 2 to 3 touches across this, cash incentive for a meeting initiative, 2 to 3 touches around this market research survey. And we run them through that entire gamut. We've all of a sudden seen our conversion rates from that same 100 cohort, same amount of time span as you would do running an ROI exercise with the same amount of touches, but different call to actions, that we can move the needle from like a 1 to 2% conversion to a meeting to 10 to 12%. And like now we just
That's amazing.
onboarded, yeah, this past week, like 9 sales reps, all commission only, and giving them the playbooks, and they're booking meetings in their second day. And when you can give them the resources to do that, and also I think the other part of it was like, kind of being on the ground level with them. So we do this thing called power hour every day, where we have an hour blocked off, where we all the reps are together, including myself, and we have a competitive format within that hour of who can generate the first lead, who can get the most leads within the hour, and who can turn that lead into a meeting the fastest within the hour. And I participate, and I'm competing against them as well at the same time. And when I get one, or when somebody else gets one, we all share with each other what worked. Did we say? How did we get it? And when you think about that, and when I think about, again, referencing the other 200, 250 companies I've worked with or advised for, like getting to a meeting with a sales rep, like having them be able to book one within like the first 2 days, like that's efficiency. And I think that's like, again, something where not enough, I think, founders or even on the C-suite side of things get their hands dirty, roll up their sleeves to do it. And when you hire against it, you're setting yourself up for a hit or miss. I mean, it's a 50-50. Like, you don't know what the expected outcome is. You don't know how to measure it. You don't, what I mean? Like, it's really hard to justify what success actually looks like. For me, I know, like, by allocating 10 to 15% of my time, I was able to generate 10 meetings a week, and I can convert 4 to 5 of those into customers over a 2 week period. So if I have somebody else coming in full time, at a bare minimum, they should be doing 10 meetings a week, right? Converting 3 to 4, let's just say on the lower side of a conversion, into customers in that same period. So I only got there because I put myself in there. And I think more founders need to do something like that. And that way you can know what's working, what's not working, why it isn't. And then by the time you do hire, that you have something to give them. And then it doesn't mean that your way is the best way either. It's like now you have a collaborative environment, but they have something for 60 to 70% of their time that's going to churn output, right? Churn out results. And then the rest of the time, experiment with different things, find different ways that things are going to work. And that's what I think has been super successful for us during this time period. And I think more companies, like, instead of, what I've seen is like more companies are starting to realize we do have to get our hands dirty. We have to roll up our sleeves. We have to start understanding the basic, unit economics of what we're doing here at every little fine, minute stage, has been ever more critical. Because I think before, you could get away with it. You could just throw, budget towards something, and then seeing if something's coming out of it, but you're not understanding the nuts and bolts of it all. And now with the market where it is, and even just kind of like within the VC community, right? Like tightening their belts, cash isn't so readily accessible. And so you're forced to, I think, be on this more lean and mean mindset.
No, I agree. We're in a situation where that's absolutely the need. I wonder, and I'm going to be very fascinated to see how it plays out. How many people are able to recognize that and adjust to it? Because at heart, we're looking at virtually an entire generation of us that have been out here doing this in an environment where it's primarily powered through VCs and a lot of money and growth at any cost. And and there's been a lot of looking for like easy buttons and hey,
Hmm.
on the spreadsheet it says for every rep I add, it's going to generate this much pipeline and going to turn into this much revenue. And so it's a spreadsheet problem and it's an HR problem. It's not a like, hey, do I get in and get my hands dirty and figure out what this process looks like and how do we optimize that? What's reasonable and all of that stuff.
Yeah. It's so important, man. I mean, like, I think, you do need to know every little nuanced step that you're expecting the customer to take. And you have to understand and track each of those little stages, what do I want that? What is the next step here? What is the next action I'm asking them? And the same thing is like when you're optimizing a website, right? Like, you're trying to
Right.
minimize into as few clicks as possible for them to get to that win, right? I mean, like with Amazon getting to the one click checkout thing. I mean, you got to think about the same way
Right.
for customer acquisition. How can I minimize the number of steps here? And this goes to even like how we schedule people. Like when we get somebody
Mhm.
who's positively interested in whatever like outreach or messaging that we got them to respond positively to, we statistically speaking, we know that there's an 80% chance of us booking them into a meeting if we get back to them within 2 hours. After 2 hours, it
Mhm.
goes from 80% to 30%. So I typically will give our SDRs or sales reps like the green light to leverage as many channels within the 2 hours time span to get them into that meeting. But again, now given the environment, I don't think a lot of sales teams necessarily thought about that or think in that way, let alone study it and really obsess about it. And for me, I think like coming from like an entertainment background, coming from a place where like even going into my early 30s, I was like cash strapped and in financial difficulty and like in the place where I was still answering phones for $12 an hour at a cancer care clinic trying to get my first startup off the ground. I go back to those moments, right? So like that's
Mhm.
where yeah, I'm staying motivated and inspired is like I never want to go back there. Like that's where I'm coming from. Like my back's against the wall. I need to figure out how to make this work. And I think this is like a character, more of like a character study more than anything else. It's like when something's not working now, like how far are you really willing to dig and look into yourself to, take accountability for the problem and then work on solving the problem. And I think more leaders need to do that and take accountability, get into it with their teams, and that's inspiring, that's motivating, that also sets a precedent for everybody else.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, I think at heart, the more I'm hearing from this, the more I'm hearing the background and the philosophy of, somebody who is a true growth person because, and back before growth became like a hot topic or a title or whatever, like, hey, I can't help myself but to get my hands dirty in
Yeah,
all of these different things and start playing around with all the different departments and all the different functions and how do we actually optimize this, soup to nuts versus, now you've got, umpteen, flavors of growth. And it's like, okay, are you a product growth person or a growth marketing person or, whatever. But I think at heart, it's, you can't help yourself but, get your hands dirty and see how does all of this actually work and tie together. Um, so yeah, I mean, absolutely awesome to get to find and speak to somebody that's got that sort of same take on it and philosophy there with it. Just personal, professional curiosity out of it. Your time frame for getting into growth was about the same as mine, which was when it wasn't even really cold growth. It
yeah,
was just starting to emerge out of Silicon Valley, and for me, it was kind of cool. It's like, oh, holy shit! Like, there's a name and there's a philosophy behind this thing I've been doing. Just kind of flying blind and doing all of that.
yeah.
But how did you find yourself in that type of role?
From that first startup, right? So again, like first of all, I think like my checkered like work history set me up pretty nicely for growth because like growth to me is about storytelling, but also using data to then substantiate the way that you're scaling that story effectively. So that storytelling coming from just working in the entertainment world, and then finance background of how to like utilize data and then how to understand it. I think like my first startup is when I kind of figured out that I had a knack for it. I mean, I was always in my 20s, that person who had a bunch of ideas but didn't know how to execute against it. I, could have sworn I had the idea for Netflix before Netflix came about, but I'm not a technical person, didn't know how to code. And so, like, I was just the person who was like seeing things fly by. That first startup, both of my friends were technical people. So one was a project manager up in Silicon Valley, and another one ran a digital agency. And so it was going through that experience with them that I ultimately realized what coding can do, what developers can do. And when you realize all of a sudden, oh, basically anything can be automated or built, or whatever idea that you have can be created, that's an aha moment. That's an epiphany where all of a sudden, yes, we are in the matrix, and either you are the creator or consumer of your destiny, right? So it's like, so those are some of the things that I figured out. But I also think like, just getting started with growth, it was more so of this, just like I need to make something happen. We were doing online tuxedo rentals, and we didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about paid advertising or how to like run campaigns on Facebook and all that stuff. And there are maybe two other competitors in the space, and they're focusing on the wedding market. And one company is called the Black Tux, is based in Santa Monica. They're probably the predominant leader now. And another one was called Menguin, that was competing with us at the same time. All three of us were there just around the same time, and they ended up getting bought out by the guy who started Men's Warehouse, and they had a nice exit of I think 20-25 million. We didn't have that same fortunate exit. We were able to sell the business later on, but I think like we we basically, hit about a quarter million in revenue in less than a year's time by partnering with high schools. We went the opposite route. We did the proms and the formals and the whole nine. And that was more so, I think, because we didn't know how to figure out how to like leverage things like Facebook. It felt very like easy to understand, like, hey, we can create a partnership with a school. And then what we can then just like give them a cash for schools program and run something like that. And we just need a way to track the number of rentals that's happening from that school. And so, uh, the my friend who ran a digital agency helped us like build out the infrastructure for us to do that. So we were able to give every school like their own digital storefront that we were running on Magento. And but to get the schools onboarded and selling the schools, we knew that we had to sell us. The role was the student activities director, and so it was, for the most part, it was me and then maybe one other team member that would be driving up and down the coast of California, trying to get as many people like on board as possible and knocking on doors. And that was it. Like at that first year, um, we ended up converting about a third of the high schools in California. It was maybe close to like 200 to 300 or something like that, which is
Wow.
pretty insane. Just from like, again, driving up and down the coast and doing the handshakes and meeting people in person. It was super stressful. I ended up getting shingles from the whole experience, which
Oh God.
is an older person's disease. But yeah, that's how I kind of cut my teeth on just sales and in general. And then when we ended up exiting the company, like a year and a half later, I ended up sticking around with startups just because that's the only thing I knew at that point. I wasn't going to go back to finance. I was way too far removed from that. And I wasn't going to go back to film because there was way too inconsistent. And so, that's where I ended up working for a few companies in like a head of sales, head of growth type role, mostly more on the consumer side. And then, yeah, had this room to kind of like experiment with ideas, which is essentially to me like growth marketing really is. But then finding the things that end up working and then using data to making sure that you do it effectively. So that's kind of like how I got involved with the whole thing, and then ended up doing consulting, outgrew that, turned it into an agency. Um, and then, yeah, a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, hit an inflection point of, do I want to try to scale up the agency? Which was a great lifestyle business, but had become less challenging personally and professionally, or do I want to try to get my hands dirty again and do another startup? So I was crazy enough to vote for the latter.
Yeah, like I said, we can't help ourselves, and
Yeah,
you have to be crazy if you're not like us to go try and do it.
absolutely.
Um, so, yeah, we've talked about SQLs. It begs the question. It always makes me cringe anytime I'm talking to a potential client or something like that, and they start talking like, "All right, we got all these MQLs, and we're passing them to an SQL stage and to the sales team," and it's like, "All right, what are you calling an MQL?
Yeah,
What's your threshold for an SQL?" And more often than not, it's like, no, that is not an SQL." And so, the answer to like when and where and what your threshold is obviously going to vary based off the company and the product.
Yeah.
But especially given that you've worked with so many, at a high level, can you sort of speak to where you would typically set that, or what types of thresholds or things that you're looking for it to be a true SQL?
Yeah, like a true sales qualified lead, in my opinion, is a completed product demo. I think if you want to talk about the qualification part, should be happening before that demo actually happens. So I think like that's how I would define it in most cases, especially in the B2B world, is just that. So it's a completed product demo, and so when quotas are being created, I think like it should be focused on completed and not just booked. I know there's a lot of
Hmm.
reasons of why somebody may not show up, but I think like if you've done all the work leading up to it actually getting booked, then it's just a series of reminders and figuring out what those reminders need to be to get them to show up. And that could, even be like the SDR focusing on spending a certain amount of their time, like calling to do those reminders over a certain amount of time period, right?
Hmm.
Um, I just know that, like, from our experiences, that there probably needs to be about 3 reminders set outside of just what you're relying
Hmm.
upon on the typical tool, whether it's Calendly or, a iCal reminder. You need to also institute your own versions of that, whether it's SMS or a cold call or whatever it might be, just to make sure that they show up. And, I'd say, like, we got really good at that, knowing that we needed to get to like a 80-90% show rate. Otherwise, we don't hit the quotas of what we were trying to do.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it's interesting that that's kind of the stage that you would set as an SQL. I know a lot of companies that I've worked with or spoken to would use the distinction between a SQL and a sales accepted lead, and typically that would be like, hey, I had the meeting. It's actually an opportunity, and so that definition or threshold for an SQ or sorry an yeah, SQL is a slightly further along than most of the companies
Yeah.
that I've spoken to. Do you guys make the distinction between an SQL and SAL, or or is it just SQL?
No, so I mean, again, this maybe because of like my lack of, a formal sales background, right? But I try to dumb it down into the most simplest things possible. So, marketing qualified lead to me is anybody who expresses positive interest. And sales qualified lead is somebody that actually completes a meeting, and then it's going to customer. And so I think like
Mhm.
in between from completed meeting to customer, there's a few paths that they can take. So either they are actually genuinely interested after the meeting, or they're not interested. If they're not interested, to me, it's bucketing the reason for them as to why they're not interested. It may very well be where it's like, we don't have budget right now, circle back in 6 months kind of deal. Still, to me, that's a sales qualified lead that's sitting under that kind of categorization. To me, like, I think a lot of the acronyms, never really added up to me in a lot of ways for whatever reason. It just might be my own ignorance.
Yeah.
But I think like, trying to define things as simplistically as possible as opposed to defaulting to what Salesforce tells you to do, I think is so important, especially because when you bring in new teams or hire new people, like because every company kind of defines it differently, those acronyms, it's really important to just like dumb it down in a way where like, all right, I know exactly what this is because the what you call it is what it is. And so that's kind of how I've thought about it. So when we utilize CRMs, like we have, the source of the deals, and then we also know like kind of where at every stage that they're standing. So if they're a marketing qualified lead, they've expressed positive interest. We know the exact kind of reason for that interest. And then our job is to then make sure between that time and when the meeting happens is like the SDR or the sales rep is actually qualifying and making sure again on paper that they are a legit fit for what we're doing, and they could be a prospective customer for us. So I think like the other caveat is that at least working with startups, and this might be different in different spaces, but at least in the startup world, it's a lot different than selling financial services or a real estate broker, right? It's
Mhm.
like it's in those worlds, it's like very difficult to differentiate yourself from the next, other than personality and your Rolodex. I think in the tech space, ideally, like a lot of the companies I worked with are either defining a category or they're operating like a green pasture, white space kind of scenario. So the typical like lift is going to be more so about education than it is necessarily like
Mhm.
true sales. And so how do we get them into a position where we can just explain to them exactly like what it is that our client or customer is doing, and how is it actually solving a pain point for them, that they may or may not realize there's actual solution for. So that's kind of, I think, like, again, going back to dumbing things down. It's like I don't know if enough companies do this exercise where, when we started working with a client on the agency side, we made them fill out a persona matrix, like understand
Mhm.
exactly who it is, like ICP persona matrix. So like ICP, I think about ideal customer profile. That's more on a company wide level or an account basis. Persona is the who you're talking to within the organization, right? And so, um, it could be the same ICP, but different personas. It could be top down, bottom up approach, whatever it is. But whatever you're saying in terms of value props, messaging, pain points, how they're talking about it, it's all very, very different, right? So if you're selling to that same company, if you're selling to C-suite, they care about how it impacts top line revenue, right? Like, what is that going to do for me? If you're talking to the bottom, bottom up, and you're talking about like the end user, they're going to care about like, how does this make my day easier? How much time am I saving?
Mhm.
So that's to me, like, you got to really get that granular, understand it, in order for you to then position yourself in a way to create the stuff that's actually going to resonate and get results.
Yeah. Absolutely, don't get me wrong, I was not saying that those, different stages are the way that anybody should go. In fact, I absolutely err on the side that you're talking about. I tell people that I work with, including, Jared at Rev Genius, I'm like, "Let's start as simple as we possibly
Yeah.
can, and then only add complexity when we've got a compelling reason to do it, and we know what we're gonna do with that, additional layer of complexity." And so, like, if you're an organization where having like 10 different stages between marketing and sales makes sense and you got compelling reasons for those and you're doing things with them, they're like, absolutely. Make up as many acronyms as you need to and use those as effectively as you can. But let's not go that route just because somebody told you, like, hey, you should structure it this way. It goes from this one to this one to this one. Because way too often I find like there is no effective difference between those as far as like what they're doing operationally or hey,
Yeah.
we've got these stages but we're ignoring half of them. It's like why go that route, inject that type of complexity into the equation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I agree. Like, again, it may just be like my lack of, of a formal sales background, but and like just working with startups, right? So like, but again, I've seen this problem in like companies that are worth $500 million, and I just wonder, like, how did you guys get there? Like, when there's still so much confusion and disconnect between marketing and the handoff to sales, and how you guys are defining things. And so, I yeah, I don't know if there's a right way or wrong way. I think it's just like whatever's going to be the most effective for your organization, right? That's how I think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, if it's your lack of formal sales background, I think that we should all aim to have less of that. If that's the direction that it's taking you, and you're doing that more complex route without a need for it. So, I think one thing that I'm seeing more and more people struggle with, I think they've always struggled with it for the most part, but especially in light of what's happening recently, is not understanding what to do with, top and middle of the funnel leads that
Mhm.
come through, or even in a lot of cases, what that actually entails. And especially middle of the funnel, I see people like scratching their heads. And I mean, in my experience, generating middle of the funnel leads and or middle of the funnel intent signals is always the hardest one. I'd say probably half the time that I create something, I'm like, okay, this is something that's gonna be targeted middle of the funnel. Like, I go and look at the data afterwards, like, "Nope, nope, that was really top of the funnel." We're like, "No, that was really bottom of the funnel." It's like, "That was not middle of the funnel." I think that one's really hard, but I see, I mean, here at Rev Genius, we've got a lot of people that come in and like, hey, I want to sponsor events with you. I want to go, run a webinar or a couple of webinars, whatever. And, it's like, okay, we're going to generate, 150, 200, 250 leads out of this. And I'm going to go hand that to my salespeople. And I'm going to have them just call on those. And we're looking for a quick ROI out of it. And I'm sitting there going like, I've been in your shoes for my entire career. I was like, trust me, that is not going to work. You've got to have some more sophistication with what you're doing as a follow up. That's not a lead that's ready to be passed to a salesperson. I think every one of us is like, has experienced that. Hey, I just registered for this webinar. Why do I have a salesperson calling me?
Yeah,
Especially if they're doing it like jumping the gun and doing it before the event even
yeah.
happens. So what's kind of your advice or direction with companies that are struggling with that, or don't have enough understanding? How do you progress people along that path of that journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think about this. Time has a cost associated to it, right? So every time you have a salesperson or marketing person chasing for getting to a binary response of some sort, however much time that they're spending on it, there's a cost. So to me, it's almost like understand what that cost structure looks like. And is there a way to shorten that time period to get to the binary response by just giving whatever that's going to cost you to the end person, right? So to that prospect directly in some shape or form, whether it's a gift card or some product or whatever. Um, that's my way of thinking. Again, like I think just dumbing it down, and it's like, and it works really well for us. So what we do is sometimes, like for example, we'll run $100 for feedback approach, right? And again, if we just do our job of like qualifying prior to the meeting, happy to pay $100 because like we can book a meeting using that approach at about a 15-20% conversion rate in less than, in a lot of times, less than like 5 minutes, like from a cold outreach to then getting something into the calendar. And that works effectively for us to convert to customers because again we're doing something a little bit differently, and maybe it's like there's not a lot of other people doing what we're doing, and that puts us in a competitive advantage. Now, like I think not enough companies will do this, which is understanding the pain point as it relates to the end user, number one, which is like how big of a pain on a scale of like 1 to 5, 5 being like extreme pain, is the person that you're putting into your funnel actually like realizing that pain point, right? Like I and I don't know if it's like they don't do that exercise because they're scared of the answer, or whatever it might be, but you need to truly understand the ones that are experiencing a 4 or 5 on that pain scale. Those are the ones you need to do whatever it takes to get onto a phone call, right? Or get onto a book demo. um, and then separately from that, it would be like getting to, I think you can't be scared to getting to a binary answer post mid funnel. So to me, like again, if we follow our kind of like discounting methodology, we know how much from a unit economic standpoint what we can offer in terms of a discount. So bottom threshold, what we can offer. So within that 2 week time span, we have those different lures that we will use to then very end is the most discount that we know we can do, period. And so at that point in time, if we don't get somebody to bite, we will pay them $25 to just let us know the reason for the objection.
Mhm.
And we're not going to bother you. We don't care what we don't care about you becoming a customer at that point. We just want to know the reason for the objection. And if you can get enough of that data set, it's going to help you with everything from top to that point of the funnel, because you're going to learn too expensive, or it's like, you know what, it's conflicting with the way when our budgets are taking place, or like, I'm not the person to then make these decisions. And you, over time, statistically, you're going to get enough data that's going to show you common themes and trends around that data that's going to help you. But you don't get there unless you get those answers. And I think that's what ends up happening a lot of times is that you're trying to get all the way through this entire funnel when there's a lot to be learned at every single stage that can help you be much more effective at the very top. Um, I think about it even like even further and more advanced than that, which is like it's not just about close to customer, but then like listening to existing customers and taking customer success feedback, asking the right questions at the right points in time to then how do you further improve the top of the funnel, right? So there's things around that where it's like, look, a lot of customers under this set are giving me a lot of problems, but they really identify and find value in this feature. Well, then what we can do is funnel that to product, and then we can
Mhm.
create like a self-service model for that particular feature set where they don't get access to support, because that's what they're truly realizing. And then it's now going to eliminate the majority of the problems for you. And we can probably add more revenue by doing throwing less cost towards it at the end of the day. So I think that's like um, trying to get like that feedback loop going from all different points as much as possible, and not being scared to get to binary answers as quick as possible is something that I think like a lot of, again, teams that I've worked with or advised for, like, don't do for whatever
Mhm.
reason, but I think it's so critical.
Absolutely, and, obviously, that includes and entails a rather sophisticated understanding of what the efficiencies and true costs are organizationally, so,
Yeah.
way too often, it's just like, "Oh, holy crap, we're giving out these gift cards," and that's a cost that we have that's associated with, the CAC that we have relative to this product, and it's like, well, you're not paying attention to, like, all right, how much are you paying these reps to go
Yeah.
chase themselves and
Yeah.
not get anywhere with it and all of that stuff, and how much more efficient can we be with the product and dialing in our product market fit and stuff, and we got this type of feedback within that, and so it requires a much higher level of sophistication than I've seen at most organizations that I've worked with or dealt with, but I think that type of thing is becoming increasingly critical, because if you're still thinking like in that very confined thought process or idea of how this is supposed to work, like you're missing these opportunities to see, okay, this is how we do it differently, this is how we do it better, that's really going to move the needle at the end of the
Yeah.
day and ultimately affect the bottom line. And so super interesting hearing that from you.
1000%. I mean, I think like it's somewhat of an art to simplify things to that way where, like, look, what do we need to happen to consider this stage or this action to become a success, right? What is that literal thing that has to happen? And then kind of backwards engineer, to that outcome, and then figure out like, well, what are the different interactions that need to happen in order for that outcome to occur? And then like, how do we optimize each of those little things? And then thinking outside the box where it's like, again, if I'm just trying to bump this up to the top of your inbox all day long, like, that's not working, then you need to try another tactic. Like, what is the other tactic? And uh, I think again, when people think about like a product demo, for example, like, it's really a conversation, right? It's a really like this
Mhm,
swap of attention. And so, you know, sometimes coming at it from like a sales motion isn't the best way to do it. Maybe coming at it from a
mhm,
partnerships kind of standpoint, or like we have like all these different things, like from asking them to be a part of a product advisory board as a different call to action, asking them to be a guest speaker at our conference as a way to generate that engagement, asking them to be a guest on a podcast. Like, that's another way to generate engagement, right? Those are longer winded exercises where they may not enter your sales funnel immediately, but they're going to be great ways for you to start a relationship, and usually going to be with somebody who's on the more senior side of things. And that's going to cut through a lot of noise to start some kind of, again, engagement and response where you can work through that ultimately into turning a customer out of it at the end of the day. So I think just thinking more from like that perspective of like, how do I try more different types of call to actions, to get somebody to engage with me, is really important to think about.
I hope my team is listening to this because what you just said is stuff that almost verbatim that I'm telling them. It's like, hey, we gotta come at it from this angle. This is how we coordinate, our emotions, all of that stuff. So
Yeah.
that's going to be super familiar to them. You said one word in there that I think is really critical, and more and more I'm talking about this with companies that I talk to or work with. That's engineering, and you know I cringe every time somebody talks to me about their lead scoring that they're implementing or their lead scoring model or whatever. And it's like, holy crap, talk about something that, for the most part doesn't work.
Yeah.
But what does work is engineering those intent signals or engineering those conversion points and stuff like that so that you get what you need at that stage, in order to know what to do with them and how to progress them and where they actually are within that. And it's so much more effective than like, how many times have they opened an email and that
Yeah.
was worth 2 points every single time? And it's like, no, they're just that's their process for deleting emails. They don't
Yeah.
delete them before they open
Exactly.
them. It's like that's who you identified.
Yeah, or you might be in spam, and that's where the click happened. Like a lot I mean, yeah, there's a lot of things where I think this intent data is like, or lead scoring. I mean, you gotta imagine like how often when how we scrambled just through to fill out a form just so we can get to whatever the lure was, right? And like how sincere were we in answering those questions, right? Like the leads that you're scoring are doing, probably majority of the same thing. It's just like, okay, I see like there's a great thought leadership piece that I want to download, but I'm gonna have to fill out all these questions. Okay, I'm just gonna da 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 da. Like I've done that. Just the first selection I'm gonna choose, and then if that's like impacting my score, like you're working off of that. That's really like not useful to you. So to me, I think like it's not to say you don't want to score a lead or qualify a lead, but I think there has to be more involved to it where one, the sincerity is there and how they answer those questions. Where again, like what we've done before is like, hey, we'll pay you $100 to take a meeting. Once we do that and we say like, hey, can you answer these 4 questions, by the way, so we can better like structure the call to make sure we maximize that time efficiently, they're inclined to answer those questions at that point sincerely, right? And so once they do that, we knew that like, all right, well, based on how they answer this, let's keep the meeting. If they answered it in a way where it's like that doesn't actually qualify, or like, we see poor intent here, then at the end of the day we could cancel the meeting. People are okay with you canceling, and then even what we would do historically is just giving them like a $5 Starbucks gift card saying
Mhm.
apologize for the inconvenience, had enough conversations, but they would be off on their merry way, and they gave you all this real data that was sincere, authentic, and you're not guessing. Like, and that's I think the biggest part of it. When you're like tracking now open rates and click throughs and all that stuff, I mean, it's a crapshoot. Like it's a crapshoot. I know like a lot of the analytics, I didn't know this before going into doing another startup, but a lot of the analytics that we're looking from Google, or or on like SendGrid or what have you, it's not accurate, and we had to install our own
Mhm.
cook we had to have our dev team create our own internal cookies to track how things were moving along the funnel and build it out into our own product in order for us to get accurate tracking and attribution. And there's other companies that are obviously making a killing doing this for you, but they're like 6 figures to get it,
Oh, yeah.
get it operating for you and running for you. But that's where I think like, your sales and marketing teams like needs to talk to product, needs to talk to also like that's the development side. So you understand what the problems are. Otherwise you are still flying blind. You just think you're not. And that's even scarier, I feel like, than not knowing.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. So, yeah, we're coming up on the end of the time. You were kind enough to share your playbook with them. It's been in the resources section of AirMeet. If you haven't grabbed it already, grab that. We'll kick that out in the recap email as well with a link to that so that you can download that. And in the meantime, Chris, tell everybody where they can reach you.
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn is probably the easiest and most relevant. You can also go through my website, ChrisSheng.com, or through Leader Pro. I also work closely with Mucker Capital in Los Angeles, so you can also hit me up there, cs@mucker.com. I'm one of the resident growth advisors, so work with a lot of their portfolio companies. Yeah, so hit me up if you have any questions around growth, or around, even getting investor introductions or what have you. Happy to do so. Again, like I've been that dude on the couch with great ideas, and so if whatever I've learned to become an expert in this field the past 10 years, I'm happy to pass it along and pay it forward. And if I can help somebody like overcome some obstacle, or create a shortcut just based on a lot of my trial and error experiences, I'm happy to do so.
Awesome. Chris, this has been amazing. I've really thoroughly enjoyed this.